Okay, well, as we creep our way along here through the book of Genesis, the next major milestone is the story of Noah and the flood. But the more that I started thinking through this section, the more I felt like, I'm sure this is going to be received with rapturous applause, but the more I felt like we needed to divide the story in two and do two sessions on it. Because quite frankly, so much of what is going on in the world today, in general, it has its roots in kind of this story of Noah and the flood. So I want to start today talking about Noah and the sons of God. And I'll read our first scripture here, Genesis chapter 4, beginning in verse 25. It says, "And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God, said she, hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord." All right. So we've been talking for the last couple of weeks about Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, and we talked a bit about how Adam is sort of the mediator between heaven and earth, right? God's will is implemented on earth as it is in heaven through Adam, right? Adam is God's representative on earth. And we talked about Adam in his fall being expelled from the garden, and he lost the intimacy with God. He lost kind of the day-to-day, face-to-face, because he had turned aside to his own will rather than God's will. Suddenly there's something imposed between him. In fact, what is imposed between him and God is a door of sorts with a flaming cherub to guard the door and a flaming sword. And we'll see that image again when we get to the tabernacle, because what separates the holy place from the most holy place is, again, a veil with a cherubim on it. And that's meant to represent the barrier between our realm and paradise. That beyond that veil is Eden, where the presence of God is. Now, man can still come close. He can still enter into the holy place, but now there's a barrier between him. And then we get to the story of Cain, and we talked about how his countenance fell, right? We talked about the beginning of a kind of the theology of the face. He says, it says his countenance fell, which reads literally, his face fell. And it says, now I am turned away from your face, God, and from the face of the earth. So this idea of the face is a very important idea. But with Cain and his sin, he's cut off from heaven. He's estranged, we'll say, from heaven. He is alienated from heaven. And he is alienated from the earth, right? So he's kind of all alone. He is a vagabond and a wanderer. And we talked about how from here he goes on to found a city, and how the city is kind of that embodiment of alienation, right? It's a place where, though you're surrounded with people, you're still alone, right? And he no longer has his roots in the earth. He no longer has his connection, his communion with heaven. We talked about communion, what that means. It means joint participation with, right? And Adam's communion with God was his participation in the commandment. And having broken that communion, all of these things that come later spiral out of that. So that's what we talked about last time. So now man finds himself in this condition where he's cut off from the presence of God. And on the one hand, you have Cain and his descendants. And on the other, we now have someone who has come to replace Abel, whom Cain slew. We have Seth. And it says, then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. So they've lost the face of God, but they've gained the name, right? And the name is kind of the handle by which you take hold of God, right? You call upon his name. And so with the children of Seth, man begins to call upon the name of God. And the name begins to take on a very important role in that spot. And so that's the situation that mankind finds itself in. You have those that are completely alienated from God, who are of the children of Cain, we'll say. And you have the children of Seth, who are estranged from God but still call upon his name. They still have a relationship through the name of God. And then we come to our next passage, chapter 6, beginning in verse 1 through 14. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. And Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. And then we'll skip a little more of the detail on the building, and we'll get to verse 17. And behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth, to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven. And everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee will I establish my covenant. And thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee. And of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark. To keep them alive with thee, they shall be male and female. Of fowls after their kind, and of cattle after their kind, of every creeping thing of the earth after his kind, 2 of every sort shall come unto thee, to keep them alive. All right, we'll stop there. So there's a lot going on in that brief passage. So you can look at the story of the sons of God and the daughters of men, and you can You can read that very straightforwardly as angelic powers, spiritual beings, taking wives of human women that bear children that became mighty men of renown and giants. Seems like a strange idea, but it's not. It's not unique, right? So all through the Mediterranean world, and really all over the world, the idea of men who were the sons of the gods is not uncommon. We know, if you know a little bit about Greek mythology, you've got Hercules is the son of Zeus. You've got Achilles, I believe he's the son of, I don't remember who he's the son of, but he's one of them too. But so this idea that that mighty men are the sons of spiritual powers is common. And so you can read that definitely that way. And, I wouldn't, I'm not discouraging you from thinking that way, but there's another way you can read this story to add to it, we'll say, right? You can look at it that one way, but you can also look at it this other way to add story or add meaning to it. So if we go back to Cain and we talk about him being cut off from the earth, and we talk about him being cut off from heaven, once he loses his communion with heaven, we have what you might call a vacuum. And the thing about a vacuum is nature abhors a vacuum. Something is going to fill it, right? And so other powers, Cain has turned his face, he's cast his countenance downward, he's looking to the earth. So he's no longer looking up to God, he no longer has communion with God. So other powers step into that void. And what you can see here is what you might call the beginning of idolatry, right? With the sons of God and the daughters of men. When we talk about the sons of God, and we're talking about angelic powers. Angelic powers are spirits. And spirits are not like us. They're not personalities in the same way that we are. You can almost think, there's various hierarchies and levels of that, but for some of the angelic powers at least, you can almost think of them as like, specifically the demonic powers, you can think of them as like a bad idea, right? Because it's something that infests your mind, and it churns on you and it chews on you until it corrupts you, right? That's how demons attack you, is they corrupt you through your mind and through your thought. So what you can see here, and symbolically speaking, when we talk about the daughters of men, and bearing children specifically, a woman is the one who gives flesh, gives body to the child, right? That's why in the creed it says that Christ took flesh of the Virgin Mary and was born. So it's not just a simple story of evil male angels and women on earth. It's this idea that these negative ideas, these evil thoughts, are becoming embodied on earth. And that can happen in a man just as easily as it can with a woman. But symbolically speaking, it's the female ability to give flesh, to give body to something, right? So it becomes embodied. It becomes incarnate, we could say, almost. Not quite the same, but it becomes incarnate through that relationship. Cain has lost his vision of God. He's lost his thought of God. He's turned his thoughts away from God, and something steps into the void and begins to fill it with other things. And when those other things take hold and they corrupt him, then he begins to act them out. And that's the idea of embodiment that we're talking about here. Is like he becomes so, you could almost say he becomes infected with the evil thoughts, and he becomes corrupted. And then he begins to act them out. That's the idea of giving body to something. And so of that role, and you know, we can go back to our example. So demons at a certain level represent a particular thing, a particular emotion, a particular action. So when we talk about the mighty men of old, and we talk about Hercules, and we talk about being the sons of God and things like that, you remember Hercules was known for his strength. We talk about the strength of Hercules. He's the embodiment of that one ideal, right? And we talk about the rage of Achilles. Achilles was a warrior that no one could defeat, in part because one of his gifts that was given to him by his mother was invincibility or invulnerability, except for in his heel. But because also he possessed such rage that nobody could stand before him. So we talk about so he became the embodiment of that rage. And as such, he's revered, right? As such, Hercules is revered. He's not quite a god, but he's revered like a god, almost like a god, because he is the imperfect embodiment of that characteristic. And so men begin to follow, and I don't want to say worship in the sense, but we're coming to the borders of worship. Men begin to admire these sorts of men who are the embodiment of these ideals, these negative ideals. So you could also say that with the beginning of idolatry, it's also the beginning of tyranny. So these men become leaders of men, right? These mighty men become the leaders of men, and their followers begin to embody those ideals too. And so another thing that happened with Cain, his mind is turned away from God, his vision is turned away from God, his thought is turned away from God, but his mind, his thought, and his visions are also turned away from the earth, right? He becomes estranged from the earth. And so, and this plays into this as well, he begins to lose, we'll say, lose his disgust over what is unnatural, right? So we talk about the natural order, we talk about the natural law, we say God created the world a certain way, and it's meant to run and be ordered a certain way. It operates a certain way, and to go against those principles that it operates by is destructive, right? It's not just that it's an arbitrary thing that God commanded and now you've broken a law that's written on paper. No, it's written in the physical reality itself. Like if you jump off a building, you're probably going to break your leg or something, right? Because you're going to fall. It's written into the nature of reality itself that if you go against these natural laws, bad things happen. Well, he loses his disgust for what is unnatural. And that comes to the second aspect of the mighty men. The problem with the mighty men per se is that they are what you would call unclean. And there's this idea in the Bible, you hear talk about spirits that are unclean, and then you hear it talk about spirits that are evil. Evil and unclean are not necessarily the same thing, although they often do go together. But what unclean means in the Bible is it's a mixture of things that don't go together, right? It's things that have been put together that do not go together. It's an unnatural union, right? And people make fun of Christians in the Bible and talk about, do you wear wool and linen together? You're not supposed to do that, right? It's that idea of, but that's the idea behind the mixture of wool and linen, is that it's a mixture of things that don't go together, right? And it talks about things like you shall not see the kid in his mother's milk, right? That's an unnatural thing too, right? You're not supposed to cook the lamb in the milk of his mother, right? That's an inversion of justice. It's a perversion of justice, and it's an unclean thing, and you become unclean through that process. So the idea is that because this is a mixture, it's an unnatural mixture of heavenly powers and earthly powers, that it's unclean. And so they are, they become the giants, right? The phrase that's used in this passage, they're called the Nephilim. They become giants, and it seems like a passing thought in a weird passage of an obscure old book when we talk about the giants. But when we get later in the book and we get to the subject of Israel in the wilderness, and they're approaching the land, and they're brought in to make war on the land of Israel, the thing that they are there to do is to cleanse the land of the giants, the giant clans. There's the Anakim. Now I can't remember. There's like 4 or 5 different names. Well, the sons of, or the family of Goliath. So the symbolism of David is particularly him being small, being a child fighting against the giant. Goes into this, right? It's the idea that you're fighting against an unnatural mixture of heaven and earth, right? That's what the giants are. You might, so the thing about a giant is that it's something that has too much body, right? Too much flesh. It's too much with the earth. And so it's oriented downward. We talked about how Cain and his gaze has fallen, his countenance has fallen, and he's looking downward now, you could say, so to speak. Well, he's no longer looking upward to God, so he's not being elevated, he's not being raised in his spiritual prowess and his spiritual powers. He is looking downward to the earth for his satisfaction and for the extent of his life. And that's what it means to be alienated, is like he no longer can draw his purpose and his meaning, his logos, from heaven, and he has to find it in the earth. And as we know, I mean, this is a struggle that so many people go through, like celebrities and whatnot. They go and they get rich, and then they exhaust themselves trying to satisfy their yearning and their longing in whatever, through drugs or carnality or whatever you want to say. They find that there is no satisfaction in that, and they become, if they're not able to then lift their gaze upward, they then become suicidal, right? They look for the ultimate embracing of the earth, because what death is a reuniting with the earth, right? The spirit goes upward, but the everything else goes to the earth, and they're looking for release in the earth when the body is dissolved and becomes one and feeds the worms, so to speak. But because his gaze is now downward, and into this gap here steps these other powers, but the problem is their gaze is also downward, right? They are looking at the daughters of men. They're looking at the children of men and seeking satisfaction below rather than above. And so this is what that mixture is. You have a person who's oriented downward and thinks that every answer and every key to his happiness is in the earth. But he feels like he needs a little spiritual nourishment as well, so he aligns himself with powers that are also oriented downward. So they just reinforce the idea And this is where it's the beginning of idolatry, but you could also, again, say that it's the beginning of ideology, right? So we think that there's an ideology that will satisfy us here on earth, right? If only we can vote in the right people, then paradise will be reestablished. If only we can overthrow the oppressive government, then paradise will be reestablished. And so many of the isms of today are an attempt to reestablish the connection to paradise through means that are oriented downward rather than upward, right? Love your neighbor, too hard, no thanks. Kill my neighbor if I have to, but not love my neighbor, right? Sell all that you have and give to the poor, no thanks. Steal from everybody and give to myself, absolutely, right? That's the idea of ideology. It's an inversion because, again, it's heavenly forces oriented downward, oriented towards the earth, that people are replacing God with. And this, again, this is not God. This is just the Son. This is his representative here in this picture. They have replaced God with spiritual powers, again, those bad ideas that are oriented downward, oriented towards the earth, as if you're going to find sustenance, strength, power, health, hope, love in the earth. And so Cain and his descendants have no hope, right? Because again, they're thinking all that they've got is this world. All that they've got, but they're estranged from it. They don't understand it. They no longer live among it or with it. They no longer live in communion with the earth, but they still feel like their ability or their happiness lies in something that they can build out of the earth. And this is not to get too far into the weeds here, but the book of Enoch, which again is quoted in the Bible, but is not currently considered part of the Bible, but the book of Enoch tells this story it tells the story of the giants in greater detail. And what they suggest is that those same angels, those same angelic powers that came down to the daughters of men, taught them various forms of technology, right? Because again, technology is a way of reinforcing the life of this earth, right? It protects us from the potential for death that's around us, and it gives us something. It replaces something that we're lacking because of this lost connection. So, again, the idea is that these angels have taught men that if only they can conquer the wilderness, if only they can exploit it and take what they want from it, if rather than live in communion with it, they fashion it according to their own will, right? So there's a lot going on in that story. And there's a lot of things kicking around in Cain's head, we'll say. Cain is kind of the representative of all of the people. And it says that and as a result, having lost communion with his brethren because he slew Abel, having broken communion with his brethren, and having the people around him become objects rather than subjects, and then being filled with evil ideas, ideologies that say, and being commanded by, we'll say, men who are mighty men and of great stature. And, you can read the giant as someone who's big, and that's certainly a valid interpretation, but you can also say that he's someone who's big in other people's eyes, right? He's regarded highly. I think both of those go together because, how the Philistines regarded Goliath. Like, here, you go out and fight. We won't have to do anything. Yeah, you can't fight our guy. He's great. But because these ideologies have come to them, and because they are under the command and they're under the sway of these mighty men, and because they've lost communion with their brother, and their brother has become an object to them rather than a subject, violence begins to increase, because the way for me to find happiness is to increase the reach of my kingdom, or to increase the reach of my sovereign's kingdom, right? To increase his influence and to spread. And so these people are in the way, we'll just cut them down, and then things will be better. And that's the root of pretty much every war since the beginning of time, is that you have something that we want, and we won't be happy until we have it, so we're going to come in and smash you. But it's because men have become possessed of these ideologies rather than their connection to heaven. Having lost heaven, they become filled, and there is no neutral state, right? You can't walk around the world where you're navigating the difference between God and the ideologies. There's one or the other. And if you think that you're neutral and you're not on either side, chances are you are on one side. Chances are it's the wrong side. But now this is when God sees that, God takes a look at the earth and he's not pleased. He says that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Now, St. Augustine said a wonderful thing. He said that men don't do evil because they like evil, right? Evil is the negation of good. Evil is parasitic on good. Evil doesn't have its own existence. Evil is a parasite on the good. And the reason that men do evil things is because they think it will give them some good, right? If I kill you, I can take your house or your money or whatever. The good is that I get the money. And that is more important to me than your life. So I'll take you out, and then I'll have your stuff, and then I'll be happy. Simple as that, right? A lot of people think that way. But God finds that the wickedness of the earth is great, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the way that men can become that way, become evil to that extent where every imagination of their heart is only evil, is when they're seeking some good. They're seeking some solace from the unbearable weight of being, right? It's hard to be a human being apart from God. It's hard. Life is hard. And to bear that without God is almost unbearable. And the way that people imagine evil is by trying to alleviate that suffering. The suffering of the absence of God is what drives so much evil in this world, right? Sometimes they replace it with a false god that tells them to do evil. Sometimes they replace it with secular ideologies that act like a religion. So on and so forth. And that's how we get to this state where every imagination of the thoughts of the hearts of men is only evil continually. And it says, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast. And that's the other thing, is because Adam is meant to be the mediator between heaven and earth, when he fails, all of creation partakes of his fall. All of creation partakes of his ruin. Were the birds and the cows and things evil continually, and the thoughts of their hearts always evil? No, probably not. I don't know, I've never met an evil cow, but probably not. But they partake of his sufferings. They partake of man's fall. And it says, I will destroy them because it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of God. And Noah is the beginning of the story of redemption. Well, I mean, so Noah finds himself, he and his family, he and his 3 sons and their wives and children and all of that, they find themselves in a position where they're surrounded only by evil. So what you see here in the story of Noah is the establishment of an idea of the righteous remnant. Right? And this is the state of the world today, right? Jesus says that as in the days of Noah, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it also be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. Well, we're living through those kinds of days, not just because people are bad or doing bad things, but there's a lot going on that this story talks about that we can get into eventually. Noah being just and perfect, the earth was corrupt before God because it was filled with violence. And again, that is the acting out of an ideology, right? It's an acting out of the misery of the absence of God in their lives. In the same way, the good person is called to act out in their life that which is good, right? So it's the embodiment of those ideas that's important, right? The acting out of those things. And it says that the earth was corrupt because all the earth had corrupted its way. And that's what we're talking about. When we talk about those mixtures, the earth is corrupted. It has become mingled with things that are evil. It has become unnatural. And he says to him, make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in it, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. So first of all, the solution for this, the only way through it, God is going to act. Noah's not going to do anything. I mean, he's not going to go out and fix the problem. Like, he's not going to go and convince the people to be good, right? Because they have become corrupted. His job is to build an ark. And it's interesting to me that the ark is made from wood. We can talk about this a little bit. The ark, it's a boat, right? The idea is it's a boat. When we talk about the church, in the old ways, the old style, the traditional form of a church, this section where the congregation sits is called the nave, right? And that is a term from shipbuilding and from ships, right? It's the same word that we get navigation from. It's the same word we get navy from. This is the nave. You're on the boat when you're in here, right? The church is the ark. And what the ark is, and I might be getting a little ahead of myself. This is for next week, really, but the ark is a little world. It's the seed that will replant the world, right? All the world will spring from that place, from that. That's what the church is. The church is made to weather the storm and then replant, restore the world. It is a little world building kit. Like if you could order it online from Amazon, if you needed to build a new world after a conflagration, then that's what it would be. It would come in an ark. He tells them the fashion to make of it. It says, I do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is on the earth shall die. So the next thing to notice about the story is that the ark is intended to save the family, right? God doesn't pick random strangers and throw them on a boat together in some sort of, reality TV elimination kind of thing, right? He picks a family, right? The family. And again, that communion, because that communion is established, they're a solid and sturdy unit. He picks a family, and the ark is meant to carry the family over the waters of the flood to Mount Ararat, right? So that when the floods recede, the world begins anew. So the flood is a subject that you could talk about probably for days, but the idea, again, though, we talked about in our first little foray here, we talked about deconstruction, right? And that's why I say that today is like the days of Noah. Not so much because there are bad things happening or war or whatever. It is because everything is coming apart. Nothing is cohering together. Nothing is holding together. And we talked about the idea of the logos means that purpose, that meaning that brings things together. So we can take objects, we can take things that are different from each other, different in kind, different in structure, and put them together with a purpose, with a logos, and they become one thing, right? We talked about the microphone, we talked about the sound system, many different materials, many different pieces, all one thing. And what we see today is all of those things being pulled apart. Everybody is being, and when you have this situation where the earth is filled with violence, where everybody is an object, where you're alienated from God, where you're plagued by evil thoughts, where all of these things are happening with everybody, you're not the only one suffering. When it's happening with everybody, what you get is that everybody pushes away from each other because they don't trust anybody. You know, we used to have what you would call a high trust society, where you could leave your door unlocked at night and you can leave your keys in the car and you didn't have to worry about it. You don't do that anymore, right? You don't do that. Even way out in the country, you don't do that anymore because we've lost that trust. And men begin to push away from each other and they begin to put up barriers. Now I've got to lock my door when I see you out in the yard because I don't know what you're up to, right? Now I got to lock my car, or I'm I'm driving down the street and you come walking down the sidewalk and I need to lock the door and roll up the window because I don't know what you're going to do, because I don't trust you, because I don't know where you're coming from, because we're not sharing a communion, we're not sharing a logos, we're not here for the same purpose. And some people are oriented like Cain towards the earth. They're filled with evil ideologies, evil thoughts. They follow evil men, or they admire and emulate evil men. And they do not fear or despise what is unnatural. They don't think that nature is anything solid anyway. But that's why I say that our day is like Noah's day, because everything's coming apart. Nations are falling apart. Communities are falling apart. Families are falling apart. Institutions are falling apart. Everything that we put our trust in is no longer cohering. It is deconstructing. And a flood is a natural result of those conditions that we talked about. Because again, that force that we talked about with God, when we talked about the Trinity, we talked about love and the communion that kept things together, that is modeled in the family, love and communion that keeps that together. When you take out love, all of a sudden, and you replace it with anger and fear and mistrust, those forces that once, love is like gravity. It brings things together. But when you replace gravity with what is essentially anti-gravity, it pushes things apart. So a flood is a natural consequence of that. Everything becomes liquid. Everything becomes fluid. Everything becomes uncertain. Everything becomes, it doesn't go in just one direction. It moves in 50 different directions all at once. And then it changes and goes the other way. And that's the world that we live in. There's no solidity. There's no sure foundation. And it's times like this that call for an ark. In fact, the story of Noah and the flood, when man has fallen into this state that we're talking about here, the story of Noah and the flood becomes the pattern of history. Man becomes trapped in this cycle, right? A civilization arises, they flourish, they prosper. Men begin to become greedy or violent or what have you. They lose trust. They no longer trust each other. Other forces come in and pull it down, and it falls apart and it fades into history. And then they start again. Somebody else starts again, and they start to build up, and then it gets pulled down again. So we're stuck in this cycle. We're stuck in this pattern of the flood, where things build up and we lose the things that make those things hold together. We devalue those things that hold it together, all the little connections. We devalue them and they begin to fall apart. And then the barbarians come in, or the flood comes in, and they wipe the place out. And then we start again, right? And it goes over and over and over. I mean, the history of Israel alone tells that story over and over and over and over and over. We're stuck, and there's only one way out. And that is, so to get back to what we were talking about with the boat, it's made of wood. The wood is the cross, right? The cross is made of wood. But it says, too, that you'll make it of gopher wood, and you shall pitch it within and without with pitch. That word that they use, they talk about pitch, you know, I mean, when you make a boat, you get tar or something and you line it so that water doesn't leak in and all of that. But that word that it's talking about there is the same word that is used when we talked about the cherub that covers. It says you will cover it. It is that covering that seals the ark, that keeps that little world together, safe from the flood, safe from the dissolution and deconstruction that pulls everything apart and drowns everything. It's not just that mankind is going to lose, the whole world is going to lose and going to be drowned in what comes. And only the ark survives. Only the things that make it into the ark survive.